Okay. All right, say when.
When?
Okay. Michaela, my family history is Sicilian, but as I traced it, I found out it's really Albanian. And that we go back to the 1400s when the Muslims came into Constantinople and were beheading people. And then they went into Albania and they were looking to take over Albania. And a gentleman named Skanderbeg, who became a legendary fighter for 25 years, he holds them off, but then he finally goes to the Pope and says, we can't do it anymore. So in the late 1400s, they moved to Contessa. And now Contessa just actually put up a monument to him. But the Barbary Coast Wars, I understand the Muslims don't stop in Albania, that they end up going further. Tell me about your family.
They, we all tend to forget, I guess, that we're all part of history. So this affected those invasions, and the Barbary Coast Wars affected my family as well. My mom's family from Palermo had a lot of merchants in their history. And we know that we have family lore that goes back to the early 1800s that said we had a merchant who thought it would be wonderful to take his son on his first voyage, his first sea voyage. And he took his son with him. His son was probably around 10 years old, 10 or 12 years old. But they were captured, they were invaded and captured by, my family always said, Turkish pirates. And as my mom used to tell the story, she'd say, and we understood that the Turkish pirates were the Barbary pirates, and that's why we went to war under Thomas Jefferson. And well, the story was, eventually there was a ransom, but the ransom had a condition. And the condition was, they sent the ransom to the wife, and she was permitted to have one member of her family returned. And she had to choose whether it would be her husband or her son. And as you can imagine, it was not an easy decision. She eventually chose to have her son returned because the logic was, well, my husband's a grown man, he can survive, he can take care of himself, but my son has his whole life ahead of him, he's just a kid, he can't face this. So the son was returned, but we do know, again, in family stories, was that we were told the son was never right after that. He was kind of ruined as a person because he had, I guess, we would call it today post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So that's how, history of America meets the history of my family.
In America, we have museums to World War II Museum. We have the Civil War, get so many museums.
We ignore that.
We ignore the Barbary Coast War, which was really America's first war.
Yes, it's really important in the story of our country.
It is. We have Decatur, Georgia, Decatur, Illinois. We have Decatur Street in New Orleans. He was actually classified as America's first international war hero. Mm-hmm. But I understand the pilot of his ship was Salvador Catalano, and they sailed out of Catania. And that because Sicily had already declared war after enough of this kidnapping, enough of the enslavement of its citizen, was already at war with the Barbary Coast pirates. America joins into that war, and that's how Decatur becomes famous. We have the Marine hymn from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, was from that war.
Yeah, and we need to remember too, or remind our fellow Americans that the reason we went to war is because up until that time, the pirates they had overrun, the Barbary Coast pirates had overrun the Mediterranean, and most of the countries were paying what they call the tribute, which is typical, the jizya, the tribute. And Thomas Jefferson said, wait a minute, we're not going to pay a tribute. We should be able to sail the seas like everybody else. Nobody should have to pay this tribute. So he was the one that said, let's stop this nonsense. Let's put an end to this. And the only way they could was to go to war.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually in Ustica, which is not too far from Palermo, it's about 30 miles north, there's a lot of Usticans in New Orleans. Commander's Palace got started by an Ustican. I understood that in 1772, the whole island was captured by Muslim pirates and put into slavery. Yes. So this thing had been going on for decades, actually centuries. They estimate over 1 million people were put into slavery by the Barbary Coast pirates.
It's the numbers are staggering.
Yes, and then what happens out of that, though, is Jefferson, when that war starts, he decides to recruit Marines. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, Jefferson was an Italophile, especially when it came to music. He had an Italian violin teacher, and he made sure his children studied with the same violin teacher. And of course, Jefferson spent 3 weeks in Italy. In northern Italy, he was studying the music as well when he was there. But when he wanted to make the Marine band, he thought the Marines should have a band, and he sent the captain of the Marines to he said, when you get to Sicily, when you get to Italy, get me musicians, because he thought Italian musicians were superior. So when they landed in Sicily, because they were stationed there, because that's where they were, I guess it was a theater of war, they recruited, I guess, around 15 musicians from Catania, and that became the first Marine band. And there was a young boy that was part of that. His name was Venerando Pulizzi. He was from Catania, and he worked his way up from the fife and drum, and he eventually became the director of the Marine band. And I think we had at least 3 in the 1850s, around the 1800s, up to the mid 1800s. We had about 3 directors that were from Italy.
And what's great in New Orleans is not only do we have that, but we have in New Orleans one of the Marine bands today. There's 3. There's a Marine Reserve band, and that's stationed in Algiers. And they play at the balls, the carnival balls, they march in the parades. They're very active around New Orleans and throughout the South. And actually, I heard they went to Europe. So we have the Marine Band in New Orleans, and we hear them. We can look at those roots coming back from Sicily.
Oh, that's awesome. You're good.
I'm good.
I hope you can hear me. I'm not talking that loud, but anyway, because I feel like I'm in the library or something. So.
Well, that's
While we're here, is there anything else you
No,
want
I
to
think
do, go over?
that was really, I think, the only thing that occurred to me that we missed, that I didn't set up well enough. Okay. So,